calling a hybrid system. So we've got the members online, we've got the RAC members that are present, and then we have the public that is present and the public that is online. The public that is present will be able to speak like we used to do and come up and ask questions and provide comments. Those that are online will not be able to participate live. They can listen, and then they were to use the online comments, which we will summarize. We do have from everybody that submitted them. So with that, we'll get started, and I'd look for a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Yeah, I'd like to go ahead. This is Dan Abate. I'd like to go ahead and make a motion that we approve tonight's agenda.
I'll second that.
Thank you. And tonight we will do roll calls on votes, even for those that are present, just so it's not as confusing. I'll start with Daniel.
Yes.
Conroy. Conroy.
Sorry, excuse me, yes.
Thank you.
Hey, Brett, I don't know what it's showing. I don't know what it's showing on your end. This is Dick Bass. I am online.
Thank you, Dick. It did show when you talked. Would you introduce yourself and then also vote on this agenda item?
Sure. My name is Dick Bass. I represent agriculture, and yes.
Thank you. Dan?
Yes.
Dusty?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I'll now look for a motion to approve last meeting's minutes or any suggested edits that we have.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve minutes from last meeting.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Roll call again. Daniel?
Yes.
Conroy?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
And Dusty? Thank you. We will now move to a Wildlife Board meeting update. Dan Abeta was present at the last Wildlife Board meeting, and he'll take that task.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'd like to just go ahead and just give a little summary of what was the kind of discussed at the last Wildlife Board meeting, and that was, I think, back on the 3rd of June, so it's been a little while. The director's update consisted of some discussion about the concerns that we all know about, and that's the drought that we're in and the impacts of the drought on fisheries and wildlife. And so he talked a little bit about that. In particular, in the severe river drainage, he talked about the drought impacts down there. Also talked about the impacts on from the drought on wildlife, and talked about guzzlers and the importance of getting water to those guzzlers. And so there was some discussion there. He also mentioned about the fire closures that the state went into effect on state lands to prevent any wildfire starts. He mentioned the ongoing study down in the Book Cliffs with the captures of fawn deer and the elk calves, and just kind of that ongoing study with BYU University. So he also mentioned that yes, there's a couple of new Wildlife Board members, one from the Central Region and one from the Northern Region, and that would be Gary Nielsen from the Central Region and Bryce Thurgood representing the Northern Region. So that was kind of the summary of Director Reynolds' his update. There were just a couple of agenda items. Let's see, the one that we talked about or the two that we talked about, there was on the waterfowl hunting and prohibiting. I think the DWR's proposal was to prohibit guided waterfowl hunting on state waterfowl management areas. So that it was kind of broken down into 3 different motions there, and those motions are as follows. What passed anyway. The first motion was that the was that the division would establish a process for a special use permit for these guides to operate on state waterfowl management areas. This is primarily out on around the Great Salt Lake, and that motion passed unanimously. So now the guys will have to go through a process of getting a special use permit to do that. Let's see here. There was also a motion that that the state form a working group on moving forward with the same topic as far as guiding on state waterfowl management areas. It felt like the overall proposal to restrict guiding was that there hadn't been enough kind of legwork up front to pass that. So there was a motion that a working group be formed and kind of work through that process and then come back through the wildlife RAC and board process to see if we can kind of flush some of the details out on that process. And so that'll be done. There was a vote on that. That passed unanimously. Then the remainder of the waterfowl proposal did pass, and there were a few other little minor details on that. So that was that motion. The next motion, or the next agenda item, dealt with the electronic meetings rule, and that's kind of what we're seeing here tonight, a hybrid system where people can join online or they can come in person, and the motion was made to accept the division's proposal as was presented, and that passed unanimously as well. There were a couple other motions, or a couple other agenda items on that meeting. In particular, conservation permit list, switching from a 1-year to a 3-year process, voted on, passed unanimously. Another agenda item was the CWMU Advisory Committee vacancies. So as those were proposed, that was voted on, and those passed unanimously as well. The Parker grouse, sage grouse hunt, that area, that there was a proposal from the division to close that motion passed unanimously as well. And we have a new wildlife board chairman. That's Kevin Albrecht out of the Southeast region, and a new vice chair to Kevin, and that's our own Randy Dirth, who's here tonight. So that's pretty much sums it up there, Brett.
Thanks, Dan.
Yep.
And with that, I would like to take the opportunity to welcome Randy from the Wildlife Board here with us tonight. Thanks for attending, Randy. And one other little brief item just to update the RAC members on. We dealt with the landowner association tags and that process, and it was fairly controversial, and so there a committee was formed at the state level, and myself and Randy and Dax Mangus from the Northeast region are participating on that, and we've been meeting for about 3 months. And Heidi from the Mule Deer Foundation, excuse me. And we've been meeting for about 2 or 3 months, every 2 or 3 weeks. And we're getting to a point where we're about to make recommendations to the Wildlife Board. So I just wanted to let the RAC know that did take place. And then I think next month or the month after, you'll see the details and be able to, I guess, discuss it at that point when it goes to the Wildlife Board. With that, I'll turn the time over to Miles for a regional update.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. It's Miles Hamrick. I'm the regional supervisor here for the Northeast region for the Division of Wildlife Resources. So it's a busy time of year for us. I've got a few updates of the things that are going on. But first of all, just want to mention to the RAC members, there is the RAC and board training that's coming up on August 25th. I think most of you should have received an email about that. That'll be out at the Eccles Wildlife Center in Farmington, or you can attend on an online virtual format as well. So on that email, there is a registration link, and those that choose to attend in person, there is an option for reimbursement for travel as well. So just a quick reminder on that. Just to give you a rundown of some of the major things that are going on with some of our sections this summer. Our aquatic section, we've been really concerned about drought. It's been a statewide issue where we've really taken a look at at our fisheries and come up with ways to mitigate some of these impacts from drought. Fortunately, in this region, we're not facing the severe impacts like they are on the severe river drainage and some of those in southern Utah, where some of those reservoirs will actually be completely dry. A lot of the reservoirs here have dead pools or conservation pools that will still sustain fish. So the approach that this region took for most of that is actually reduce some of our stocking rates in some of these reservoirs just to try to mitigate potential losses. But I think we'll come through it pretty well as the way it looks. So that's kind of been the approach here. A lot of those fish were redirected to other waters in our region. Some of those places included things like Flaming Gorge Reservoir, Starvation, and some of the bigger water bodies that can definitely hold fish longer. But I think we'll come through the drought this year pretty well on most of the reservoirs here. Our aquatic staff, they're busy getting ready to complete some more rotenome work up on the north slope. This will be a continuation of some of the work in the Carter Creek drainage. There's a couple of additional streams that will be treated this fall in preparation for future Colorado River cutthroat trout restoration. So that work will be going on over the next couple of months. Our aquatics crews did survey Reeder Creek that's been previously treated and did a survey up there, and the Colorado cutthroat looked really good and healthy in there and didn't encounter any brook trout. So looks like that project was a good success for Colorado cutthroat trout. One of the things that we've been watching, and there's been a lot of rumors and information going on out there, is regarding the release of water from Flaming Gorge Dam. The Bureau of Reclamation will be releasing 125,000 acre feet. They're actually in process of doing that now from Flaming Gorge, and that'll go to Lake Powell to try to keep a buffer zone above the power plant infrastructure. So right now it's looking like that could drop the reservoir about 4 to 6 feet by winter, and then there could be additional releases planned coming forward to the late winter and into next spring. So one of the things we're really watching is a lot of the kokanee and Flaming Gorge are in lake spawners. And so when they spawn in late October, November, you want to have as stable water levels as possible until those fry are actually hatched from the eggs. So anyhow, it's a tough water situation in the Colorado River Basin for sure. We were able to stock a number of 3 to 5 inch walleye in Red Fleet. These are sterile walleye, and these were actually spawned from Starvation reservoir eggs this year. So those fish looked really good, and hopefully it'll give the walleye in Red Fleet a good boost. Let's talk a little more about wildlife, some more wildlife big game work. Again, we're documenting low fawn survival in the book cliffs this year with the study from BYU. A number of those fawns just kind of seem to tip over for no apparent reason, thinking maybe it's kind of heat exhaustion on some of those really hot days when fawns are being born. There was several that died within a week there that with necropsies, there was nothing really found. So unfortunately, we're still experiencing low fawn survival in the book cliffs, but we're also dealing with a lot of depredation issues throughout the region. This drought has really forced a number of pronghorn as well as elk into some of our agricultural lands. So that's been a big challenge that our staff's been trying to work through this year as well. And fortunately, bears have been pretty quiet this year. I thought it was going to be a terrible bear year given the drought, but they've been minding their business pretty well this year, or maybe people have really kept things clean. I don't know which, but fortunately, we haven't had to deal with many bears this year, so that's good. Our habitat section, they're working on building what they're calling a mega guzzler out in the book cliffs. It's going to be about 10,000 gallons of storage capacity when it's finished. The tanks are in, and actually the big thunderstorms we had last week put about a foot of water, I understand, in some of those tanks, even without the collection apron. So that apron will be done the next couple of weeks, and that'll be good. In addition, we're going to be looking at building some additional pronghorn guzzlers out in the Pleasant Valley area to try to keep pronghorn away from some of the ag fields where they get into depredation problems. And then we've also been working with some local conservation groups for hauling some water to some of these pronghorns to give them something to drink out away from those fields as well. So fortunately, it's been a really mild wildfire season in our region. I think there was one out in that Snake John area on BLM land, but for the most part, it's been pretty quiet in this region, so not a lot to do that way, but we'll be doing some reclamation work on some fires from the last couple of years this fall as well. Just a quick update on some outreach stuff. There was a hummingbird banding viewing event last Saturday up at Red Canyon Lodge. Nearly 100 hummingbirds were captured and banded up there, and the public got to view that. And it was all 4 species that you would expect in this area were present in that. So that was a neat event for the folks that attended. There'll be a monarch butterfly tagging event at Dinosaur National Monument on August 14th. If anybody wants to participate on that, Anthony over here is the guy that can help you out with that. So monarch butterflies the numbers have really sharply declined in the last few years. And so it's a species that's getting a lot of attention throughout the West right now. Dedicated hunter projects and works in full swing right now as people try to get that completed before the hunting season begins. So we're spending a lot of time doing that. And then the last thing I'll mention is yesterday was the final ceremony for the Fishing with the Fox contest with a bunch of prize drawings for those tagged fish. Over 200 of the 500 tagged fish were caught by the public for that contest. So that's a pretty impressive tag return rate, and glad that people had an opportunity to come out and participate in some fishing. So that's a fun event that's partnered with the local radio station. So I think that's all the updates I have for the region today, but be happy to take any questions if there are.
Thanks, Miles. Anyone on the RAC have any questions? Okay, we will roll right into the agenda items, the action items. And Darren DeBlois is here. And you're the popular one today. You got the first 2 items. So if you wouldn't mind, Darren, with this process, the presentations were online, and that's the goal is for people to look at the presentation and then not take up the time in the RAC meetings to redo the presentation. But Darren is here to summarize what the proposals are. That's what I'd like you to do, is just do a brief summary of the Furbear and Bobcat harvest recommendations. And then we'll open it up, and the process will be, we'll have questions from the public, and then questions from the RAC, and then comments from the public and comments from the RAC, and then we will vote on the item. The public that's online, you will not have the opportunity to ask questions live, and I hope you got the opportunity to do that. We will address the online questions also in the process. So Darren, if you could take a moment and.
Yeah, I'll try to just briefly summarize the Furbear recommendations. For most species, other than bobcat, we're just recommending a change in season dates in accordance with the calendar, so no changes there. For bobcats, we have 3 metrics we look at. We look at juveniles in the harvest, females in the harvest, and adult survival. And those metrics are looking better. And so we're proposing that the plan for bobcats is fairly prescriptive. So it's sort of like if then, if this occurs, then you do that. So we're doing that essentially. So we're recommending removing the cap on bobcat tags, going back to a 6 tag per individual. I don't know what the word would be for that, allowing people to buy 6 per individual. And then adding another week onto the front end of the season. That's still a week shorter than it would be sort of a baseline, but we always take or add to the front end of the season for bobcats. So for fur bears, that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
And what was the tag limit before? 4?
It was 4, yeah. So we're going from 4 back to 6, right?
And it has been 6 in the past.
It has. In fact, it's been at baseline, which would be 6. I think we might have dropped to 5 for a little while. This pretty much been 6 since this plan was enacted. So kind of back to where we were when we started.
Okay, thank you. I'll now ask the public if they have any questions. If you do have a question, how do you want to do this, Mike? Do you have a microphone?
Just come up.
Okay, we'll come up to the podium, state your name, and ask the question if you have any. Are there any questions from the public on Furbear or Bobcat? Okay, I see none. How about from the RAC? Okay, does the public have any comments or any recommendations? Okay, with none, I'll have Miles review the comments that came in and the suggestions from the public.
Yeah, we only had 3 commenters on Furbear proposal, and they were split. One strongly agreed, one somewhat agreed, and the other somewhat disagreed. I think the main concern was the one person they were concerned about just potential overharvest on bobcats. Other people wanted to see more bobcats in the population, but yeah, pretty insignificant amount of comments. But yeah, of the 3, they were a little bit across the spectrum in terms of what their opinion was.
Thank you. Comments from the RAC? I guess I've been here a while, so I'll comment. Back when we had a cap, Leslie was the biologist at the time, and we had a cap of 2,500 or 2,000 or something like that. And it was proposed to raise it to 9,000, and it was fairly substantial, and everybody was concerned. And she commented that, it probably won't change the harvest very much because there's only a fixed number of people that know how to catch bobcats. And that was the case. The harvest didn't dramatically go up when we increased it. And so I'm assuming this time around you're not expecting much harvest change.
No, it seems like harvest typically doesn't impact population levels at all. It's other things like small mammal population fluctuation and even pelt price. Pelt price will increase harvest. But yeah, we don't anticipate. We've sold the last few years with 6 per person and unlimited permits available. It's about 8,000 people that buy a permit. So a little bit more than the cap, but I don't anticipate a problem.
So you haven't even hit the current cap on the total number?
No, we've hit with the cap, we've hit it. We've sold them all. But before we had a cap, we were at about 8,000 and the cap was 6,400. And so we'd expect to see maybe something like a couple thousand more people with permits. But the harvest changes more in terms of what's the pelt price doing than anything.
Okay, thank you. Dan?
You may have mentioned this, Darren or Brett, but maybe I just missed it. But is there currently a cap for bobcats then?
Yeah, there is. Just the last 2 years, we saw what looked like low birth rates, low juveniles in the harvest, and last year we had, I think 2 years ago, we had all 3 metrics outside of the plan objectives. Last year, I think we had 2 outside, but this year two are in and one's right on the bubbles. So it's looking good.
And that cap is what?
It was 64 something. I could give you the exact number, over 64, but close to that.
Oh, that's fine. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments from anyone? Okay, with that, I will ask for a motion on the Furbear and Bobcat harvest recommendations for 2021 and 22.
Yeah, this is Dan Abate. I make a motion that we go ahead and accept what Darren's presented here, the proposal for bobcats and fur bears.
And I'll second that.
Thank you. We'll do a roll call. Daniel,
Yes.
Conroy,
Yes.
Dick,
Yes.
Dan,
Yes.
Dusty. Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. We'll move on to item number 6, the Cougar recommendations and Rule 657-10 revisions for 2021 and 22. Darren, if you'd do the same, I'd appreciate it.
Yep, absolutely. So just a quick summary, and I'll add a little bit if it's all right, on predator management. There seems to, having gone through 4 RACs, there seems to be a little bit of confusion about that. So I'll elaborate a little bit on that if that's okay. So first of all, we had some items on the in the recommendation that were informational at the very beginning. As you are probably aware, or maybe not, if you're for Dusty, if you're new, the legislature recently passed legislation that requires the director to take immediate action if we determine that predators could be limiting ungulate populations throughout the state. And we do that on a unit by unit basis. And so what we did in the presentation is show which units fall under those scenarios. The way that predator management plans are implemented is according to policy, and that policy came around last year and was approved by the board. The thing that I think has been confusing is that sometimes it's difficult for the public to tell why a unit is going into predator management or not. And so I want to just take a second and kind of explain. I'll focus on mule deer and mountain lions, since tonight we're talking about cougars, and mule deer seems to be the one that bighorn as well, but to a little bit lesser extent. First of all, there's one fairly obvious scenario under which you'd want to put a unit in predator management, and that is if you detect cause-specific mortality, especially to adults, but it could be for young as well, attributed to a predator, for in this case for cougars. We're using our collared deer data for that information. Many of our units have collared deer, and as part of BYU's ongoing study, and we do have cause-specific mortality. So for some units, we'll look directly at that, and if we see a high percentage of adults being taken by mountain lions, that might be a reason why we'd recommend a predator management plan. And what the predator management plan does is its goal is to reduce predator densities on that unit over a given amount of time. And we leave a lot of these decisions up to our regional district biologists and managers. We feel like they're the ones best suited to understand what's going on the ground. And we put a lot of weight on their recommendations for those plans. The second scenario that might place a mule deer unit under predator management would be a short-term habitat change, a drought, a hard winter that causes a steep decline in mule deer numbers and brings that population significantly below what the range in normal years would be capable of supporting. So a lot of the units that we see under predator management right now kind of fall into that category too, with the recent drought we've had. And we've had some hard winters too, and seen a lot of mule deer populations decline. We did recently, I think, big game last fall, correct me if I'm wrong, we reevaluated our mule deer unit population objectives just to make sure that that those are where they needed to be. And so we've taken a look at that. And in light of that analysis, we look at where are mule deer populations with regards to their management objective. And the concern when you see a population drop like that is the mule deer population supports a set number of predators typically. When you see a large reduction in that population, the predator numbers don't immediately decline with the mule deer population. They'll tend to hang on for some amount of time, and some studies suggest even as long as 8 years. There's still enough deer to maintain that population, but eventually it will decline. What we're trying to do is to reduce the density of predators under a shorter window, so we can bring those populations more into alignment. And then as conditions improve and mule deer start to come back, that they don't have a top-down pressure on the population from predators. So hopefully that'll help with our discussion today. I know we'll talk more about it. As far as summary, back to what we're talking about, we did make some recommendations to try to simplify the guidebook. The biggest thing is just sort of reconceptualizing our hunt structure. We're kind of getting rid of the split unit terminology. We still have it in concept, where there'd be a limited entry season on some units. The Cougar guidebook is complicated, and some of it has to be complicated because we like to give different opportunities and choices, but we're trying to pull that together and tighten it up. So some of the presentation dealt with that. And then as mentioned, we are proposing some rule changes. There's a little bit of housekeeping. Most of the rule changes deal with the legislation that passed and just making sure our rule aligns with the legislation and our policy. And also our Cougar plan, we're recommending some tweaks to that for the same reason. We did convene an internal committee to look at the Cougar management plan and decide whether we needed to bring in some outside folks and revamp the plan, and felt like at this time the targets in the plan are sufficient, but we did need to make accommodations for the legislative changes. So we're recommending that this year. We'd anticipate putting a committee together as the plan sunsets in 2025, so somewhere around that time frame. And the only other thing I have to add, just in summary, is we did catch an error that was in the presentation. I just wanted to make everyone aware of. On the season dates for pursuit season, on the LaSalle's, the San Juan Mountains, and the Book Cliffs East units, the use of hounds closes on in the original presentation, we said the 14th of April. You can't use hounds from that date forward, so that the date in the recommendation needs to be the 13th of April would be the last day a person can use hounds. So it's just a minor oversight, but it's important. Other than that, and that would be part of our proposal. So if, as you vote tonight, I don't think you need to consider that separately. Other than that, I'd be happy to answer questions.
And then just as a summary of the units that went to predator management.
There's,
it was just there was a significant adjustment, right, towards that?
Not this year. Last year, we did quite a few. So we have 53 Cougar management units in the state. There are 33 that are under predator management currently. 2 of those we're recommending this year. And actually not recommending, the director's already established predator management plans on those units. So 20 are under the plan guidelines. Half of those have a limited entry season prior to the opening up for the general public with harvest objective. And the other 10 of the 20 are just have a harvest objective and they're open year round.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We'll now ask for questions from the public, and we've got a spare microphone right here. So if you have questions, you just push the button and make it green so it's live, and state your name and ask the question. Any questions from the public? Questions from the RAC? Okay, no questions. Miles, would you address the comments from the online?
Yeah, the online comments, again, it was just 3 commenters for this region. For the Cougars, 1 person strongly agreed and 2 strongly disagreed. The person that one person felt like there were lots of cougars. He'd encountered lots of cougar kills. He refers to the Strawberry Fruitland area in his comment. The other one talks about there being many lion hunters, not a lot of mature lions in the Book Cliffs. And the last person was comment from the Mountain Lion Foundation, and their concern was they didn't want to add the Beaver East into predator management status, and then was also very concerned about hunters being allowed to kill any collared cougar, stating that can impact studies and research when those collared lions are harvested. So that's a kind of a summary of what those comments were.
Thank you. Darren, maybe I'll just jump in here. The collared lion prohibit, there was several comments that came in. Some didn't come in through the official channels. Utah Houndsman sent in a letter, a few of them. What's been happening with that issue? And the issue is there was a recommendation to make it illegal to kill a collared lion. So,
Right. Yeah. I don't want to steal Matt's thunder because I know he'll address that in a comment, but I can, do you want to wait until then, Brett? Okay, we'll do that then.
let's just go to comments from the public.
Podium's better. We can see them. Okay. Thank you. You're welcome.
All right. Thank you guys for having me out. Matt Farnsworth, Utah Houndsman Association. Dusty, I apologize. Did you get my letter? I don't know if your email was on the updated rack. All right. I'll try to cover everything, and I will send you a copy as soon as I can. So we had a couple suggestions moving forward. And over the last 4 racks, we've learned a lot about some of our suggestions and where there's been some confusion on them. So hopefully I can clarify that tonight and with a bang. The first suggestion was removing the public land grazing allotment section from the depredation rule. There was a lot of confusion about that. We would like to keep the 96-hour and wildlife services options for livestock owners that are running on public land grazing allotments. The way the current rule is written, months after the sheep have left the mountain, if it's a chronic depredation situation, the division can issue tags that are targeting or potentially targeting transient lions that are moving through months after the last kill has happened. We'd like to see that removed. As far as the collar study, I'll talk a bit about it. It's targeting 6-7 units in the central unit. One of those doesn't allow hunting by hounds, so we've left it out of our proposal. The 6 units in the central region, it's a study kind of verifying some of the USU stuff in the Book Cliffs, scavenging, lots of different ways it can go in the future. None of those units are in predator management. All of those units are actually doing really fairly well on deer populations. And we are requesting that those units not allow the harvest of collared lions only by houndsmen. We wouldn't want to penalize a sportsman with a spot and stock tag that from 300 yards didn't see the collar, and absolutely doesn't affect depredation in any way if they're the livestock owner that needs to deal with a problem with their livelihood. But for houndsmen on those 6 units, restrict the harvest of collared lions. The plan right now, currently there's 6 lions that are collared. The plan by the end of the study is to have around 30. The current ratio, 5 females, 1 tom. So we're not anticipating a big impact to the sportsman with cougar tags on those 6 units. We didn't want to leave it open-ended to run forever. So we are recommending that expire at the end of the cougar management plan, which is 3 years. That also coincides with the average life of the radio collars that are being placed on these lions. And that would give the group that puts the new cougar management plan together the option of extending that or leaving it as is. Currently, the cougar management plan calls or allows for this change, and it's also written in the cougar take rules and has been used in the past on studies that don't deal with cause-specific mortality in cougars. So it's written, it's familiar, it's been done here in the recent past. And it would really help out get accurate data on what some of these predators are doing right there along the Wasatch Front. Just as a note, it's passed, that proposal's passed every RAC that we've been to so far. And again, all the units are within the central region. As far as the Beaver East goes, we had that in our recommendation. The deer going into winter on the Beaver East have a poor body condition, which suggests more of a habitat issue than a depredation issue. The divisions talked a bit about the predator management today and the habitat potentially bringing the deer number down and lions holding them down from the top. The original House bill that's the law now doesn't address that. It's very specific about when the division takes action, and potential habitat issues because of drought aren't included in that. I don't know if that's something that you guys can take action on, but it's something we wanted to bring through the public process just as an awareness issue. On that note, we would like you guys or go through the public process anyway to request the division publish a clear criteria of when a unit goes into predator management and when it comes out. So it's all above board. It's similar to the Bobcat plan. There are triggers. If this happens, it goes in. If these matrix are hit, it comes out. Right now, it's left up to discretion, and we'd like to see a clear, targeted, if this, then this. I know they have a policy right now. It went through the Wildlife Board, but I think with you guys prodding, we might be able to get it back before the Wildlife Board to establish that clear criteria. Our last proposal, there's been a little bit of confusion on it. Currently, there are 9 units that are harvest objective only. In your region, you have one. It's the South Slope and those subunits across the front there. What we're proposing with that last proposal is all the units that are harvest objective that are not the limited entry terminology they're going to now and are not in predator management, we move from harvest objective to that limited entry, quote unquote, split season. And that would force hunters to apply for the unit they want. And I'll use your unit here, the South Slope, as an example. Establish or keep the quota as is, establish that as a limited entry unit. It would force the hunters that draw that tag to focus there. It would give them the first part of the season, which would allow for a more trophy type atmosphere for a hunt. If at the midpoint of the season they haven't accomplished the division's goals of harvest, it would open up to the harvest objective and anyone else could come in. That would be a benefit as well in forcing hunters that don't draw that tag onto the units that are in predator management, forcing more hunters to those areas, hopefully help with the take that the division wants off of those areas. It would also simplify the guidebook by removing one complete hunt section. It would involve moving nine units total, one of them in this region. Is there any questions I can answer for you guys off of that letter?
I'm not sure how many lions are collared around the state outside of them 6 units. But it's the same issue. It costs a lot of money, and you lose data when you lose a collared lion and you have to start over. So why is the recommendation limited to the 6 units?
Okay. Outside of those 6 units, my understanding, I think over the course of the RACs we've established, there's in between 12 and 15 lions that are collared throughout the state, not in those 6 units. The reason that we didn't present it, we as a board, that was the original proposal, is statewide no harvest of lions with collars. That didn't pass our board. We didn't feel that it would pass the RACs because of the units that have those lions being in predator management and the division wanting them removed, whether they have the collar or not. From a scientific background, I will say, depending on what the study is, if it's a cause mortality study, the hunter harvest is part of that cause mortality, and it may be valuable data as well. those are the reasons that it didn't pass our board. All right, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Matt. Any other comments from the public? Darren, what's the DWR's thoughts on these collared lions?
Our strategy so far has been to just ask in the guidebook that people not take collared animals, and that includes anything that's wearing a collar currently. But Matt's right. There's a lot of effort and time that goes into putting these collars on, and when they're taken a week after you get the collar on, it can be frustrating. So the history on it is we have had a few. I know one on the book list. We collared a male. That was one that was taken pretty quickly. But for the most part, it looks like people are avoiding taking collared lions. But yeah, the other thing I'd point out is that lion studies typically have lower sample sizes, so one lion can be a lot more important. What we would do in practice if we had a lion taken by a hunter under the current system, there'd be no citation issued, and we'd use that collar to put back out on another animal. But we'd incurred the time and effort cost a second time.
We've already went over the comments. Comments from the RAC or discussion.
Yeah, I've got I guess a question, Darren. Were there 4 amendments then? Is that right, Matt, that you made? Total 6. Okay. How did the other RACs throughout the state, Darren, perceive this, and how did they vote on these 6 amendments that the Houndsman Association has?
As Matt mentioned, the collar proposal has passed on those 6 specified units. Restricting the use of hounds to take those collared animals has passed all 4 so far. The public land depredation language in the rule is actually in code, and so that's really not something that the board or the RAC can change. It would require legislative change. Certainly open, if the RAC wants to discuss it, but just FYI on that. I went through a little bit on the predator management stuff. The language in the code, just what it does is it directs the division director that whenever an ungulate population is not meeting its objectives, and the division can determine that predators are a significant cause of that the director should take immediate action. And then in the policy is where we've defined those sort of scenarios that I talked about earlier. And so that's how that comes together. I'm a little bit by default and on purpose, we wanted to give our district biologists some sideboards, so some conceptual constraints on when units should be recommended for predator management or not. I do get a little bit nervous about putting hard triggers because some units can be different than others. I really, we have good professional people and I trust our district biologists and regional managers to make sound decisions. But that just by design, that's how we wrote the policy, and that's why. The final, what was the final thing? Oh yeah, the final thing on putting all harvest objective, adding a limited entry season to all harvest objective units. Again, my only concern there is just it takes some flexibility away from our district biologists, and there are different scenarios and strategies where we may want straight harvest objective. If we've got a lot of depredation issues, for example, we might want a landowner to be able to just go buy a tag over the counter and go start hunting, rather than have to draw a permit or go through sure, it certainly could be done, but he'd have to go through some extra steps to obtain a permit from us in order to do that. So I understand where Matt's coming from, but I'd prefer to let our district biologists decide whether they want to limit entry seasons or not. I think that's it.
It appears to me that the collar issue, if we just make it illegal on 6 units and recommended that you don't shoot one on the other units, you're creating yourself another. You mentioned about trying to make the rules less complicated.
Right. Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And that's, I mean, you know, you can shoot one over here, but you can't shoot one here. I would think that just, I mean, plus it's the same issue. It's a lot, it's expensive and you're trying to gather data.
Right.
So my personal take on it is, you know, we ought to, if we do recommend making it illegal to take a collared lion, I think it ought to be statewide. I'm still a little confused about the harvest objective offers a lot of opportunity. And for houndsmen to have all them units and to be able to use one tag and move between units, I'd always viewed it as a real nice thing, because they have a lot more opportunity to spread out. They have a lot more opportunity to not compete for certain lions. And so I'm kind of surprised by that. So I'd like you to maybe address that a little more, Matt.
All right. So this isn't totally to the division's benefit of simplifying and getting that take where it's needed, but currently there are 33 units in the state, unlimited year-round, over-the-counter. That provides a lot of opportunity. You have a number of houndsmen that have a large number of points, bonus points that they've occurred, that would like a quality hunt that they can use those bonus points on, where they're not dealing with year-round 365 unlimited harvest. And this would give them 9 more options where we could use our double-digit number of points that we've accrued over the past few years to have a quality, less stress. We have to kill one right now before it snows, or somebody else is going to come in and kill it before we get a chance. Provides that opportunity for our members.
You're specifically talking about South Slope, all the South Slope units?
No, it's the South Slope. I'm not sure exactly, but it's South Slope, Diamond, Vernal, Bonanza. It's the only unit in your region.
Not the South Slope, Yellowstone. So it's a fairly limited area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so if I can speak to that a little bit also, Brett.
Yes, go ahead.
So not only along with that, but each hunter is legal to obtain 2 harvest permits as well. So when you have those harvest objective units or even the predator management units, hunters can take up to 2 cougars a year in combination with a limited entry permit, spot and stock, and so forth. That approval went through, I believe, last year before. So hunters can obtain 2 tags and harvest up to 2 lions per year. And the original idea with having the hunt structures like we do is to direct focused harvest as well. And when everything's wide open, now you don't have the directed harvest in the predator management areas like you would like to see in the intention of going to predator management. And so it gives more opportunity for people to go all over the state rather than those focused areas that need that desired and more focused harvest. So the harvest objective allows that quality opportunity, but then at the end of the season, the opportunity to reach that objective of harvest by the end of the season. Which again, I mean, that can be done by folks that harvested one in a predator management unit and then come up there when the harvest objective opened. The split unit opened to that harvest objective portion of the season. So that's just some take back to history on years ago when the hunt structures were set and the units were classified that way. And so I just wanted to give a little more clarification on that.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from the RAC?
Yeah, I got one question for Darren, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
So on the rule 657-1021, Darren, now does that allow a grazer an opportunity to harvest lions in those public land allotments any time of the year, whether the livestock are present or not?
If they are issued a permit by the division. And so our objectives are always going to be to address a problem, and we leave it to our district biologist to make a decision about whether what's the likelihood that the lion that was eating sheep all summer and the summer before is still in the area or not. So typically we don't do this very often, Daniel. We've done a fair amount in the northern region, a little bit in the southern region. I don't believe the Northeastern region has issued a depredation cougar tag. I'm seeing heads shaking. It's an option and a tool, and it's specifically for chronic situations. And again, 3 months after the lion's been eating sheep, is it still there or is it not? A district biologist might be in a position to know what the likelihood of that is. And so it's a tool, but we also use some restraint, and those would all have to be approved through the manager and regional supervisor as well. So those are things. Typically, they're limited in time and space. So if we do issue them, they have a sunset. They're good for a certain period of time, and a lot of times we'll limit them to the area where the depredation occurred. So we draw a boundary around where those are valid in order to avoid them just going and hunting the whole mountain. So that's sort of how we do it in practice.
So Darren, just to clarify, that sounds to me like it's more of the depredation permit where they have up to 96 hours to harvest a targeted animal. But the way this rule reads, it would allow them, short answer, basically any time of the year, livestock present or not, which can be arguable, whether it's a ranging lion that moved through the area that really isn't there in the wintertime, or the summertime grazing areas or what have you, but not to get confused with the livestock depredation, correct?
This permit is a depredation permit. It can be issued for chronic losses outside of when the animals are on the mountain. The 96-hour provision, they don't even have to tell us. If they've got sheep losses, they can go take care of the lion. And typically they're working with wildlife services, and they'll start tracking off of the kill, and they're pretty good about getting the one that killed the sheep. And then they need to report it if they take a lion. So we may not even be aware of it during that 96-hour window. And that starts every time a lion kills something. So while the sheep are on the mountain, typically they're using that 96-hour rule. This is just for circumstances where allowing them to take some lions outside, maybe it's a week after they left the mountain and they weren't able to capture the lion that was hitting them all summer. We could issue them a permit. Wildlife services, they don't work after the livestock leave the mountain. Typically they're done once they leave. So this would give us it's just a tool we can help land or producers with, but there is some discretion there, and we rely on our folks to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. And so that was what I was trying to get to a point is when the animals are on the landscape, and as we've seen through some of these studies and the cluster points and things of that nature, there is some overlying regional areas of some of them lions and the way they move and predators in whole. These rules are pretty well in conjunction to bears as well. But that was the issue that the houndsmen were looking at when they come up with this. Through some discussion and question that I had, was the thought 1 week later, that could be a roaming lion that come through after the animals were out of the allotment. I mean, we're talking fence lines, grazing pastures and big areas that these animals cover. So that was one of the concerns, is they've got protection through the depredation rules, the 96 hours with the animals present. The scary part is when those animals aren't there, and now you really don't know if the focused animal is the intended animal, or excuse me, the one that is deserving of such unfortunate outcome on their behalf. So I just wanted to make those comments and get a clear picture for the rest of the members to understand what that proposal meant. And then speaking to the collar study, and maybe this question's for the division, there was some question about the remainder of the units, even though they're in predator management for deer. And as Matt mentioned, they were worried about, the issues of the perception and things of that nature. But with a pretty low collar count, we're not talking about a lot of lions in those areas. But how long is that study to remain in effect? I get periodic updates from Utah State that kind of give some of their information. But if those collars have a lifespan left on them, are they being monitored by somebody within the division, or how does that process work once a study's complete but collars are deployed?
Yeah, so we'll all of that data is scoured and compiled and tracked in our wildlife tracker application. So as long as the collars are live, we'll track those animals. As far as the study goes, they've just finished their third capture season, so they're wrapping up on a lot of the field work. They are working kill sites this summer, and if we do have any kittens born, they'll attempt to capture and collar those. But by fall, USDA will be done with the data collection, and they'll start into the data analysis section. And so we will have colored lines from that study on the landscape, but USU will be done with that portion. We're still interested in what they're doing and how they're moving, and that's all really good data to have. But we're less concerned about if one of those lions is taken by a hunter in like the Manti or the Book Cliffs or the cache, that's a little less critical for that particular study. And again, just discouraging people for that study. Discouraging people seems to have worked pretty well, although we have lost a small number of those to hunters.
The reason I ask as well, and maybe Clint or Dax perhaps, but with the most recent update from the neonate study, and not having a cause specific mortality for some of them fawns, and the effects of drought, not only on, the ungulates, but also the predators and how that affects their movements. I mean, is there benefit to continue or establish as much information from both sides of that as well? Or again, more of a discouragement from harvest?
I'll let Dax or Clint talk specifically about the Book Cliffs. I would just say we're going to continue to collar animals, bears, lions. We have an interest, and there might be various reasons why we'd want to do it, and we have the option, but we don't want to let these collars short circuit our management. So management questions will always be first, and then if we can obtain our management goals and keep lions on the air, great. But if not, then for example, our depredation is a good example of Houndsman talked about. If we have a collared lion in sheep herds, we're gonna remove that lion even though it's wearing a collar, because we don't want to have to pay for all of those sheep. So
it's pretty easy to see. Well, and by the recommendation, right, that doesn't protect the lion in a depredation or spot and stalk instance. So that would not be, I guess, an issue at that point. It'd actually be easier to identify the perpetrator, as Matt would put it.
Yeah, I mean, we detected that on the cache. We actually sat down with the producers and said, hey, we know where this lion is. We know it's killed sheep. If you want, today we'll go get it. But if you're interested, we can leave it on the air and see if we can determine how many sheep does this lion kill and eat that you don't find? And we did that for one summer there. So there's options, and we can work, at a landscape level and a district level for some of that stuff. And we got, that summer is about 3 to 1. They were finding one for about every 3 that they didn't find. So.
Okay, thank you. Darren, while you're there, the proposed revision that we're voting on 657-10,
right,
is?
So if we're talking about the depredation stuff, the
agenda item.
Yeah, it doesn't include what the houndsmen are talking about. So it's mainly housekeeping. It's getting rid of the split concept and sort of redefining how we set up limited entry hunting. The section that the houndsmen are talking about is taken directly from code. So again, it's not really something that the board or RAC can change. The language about public land and depredation tags and so forth. Is that what you're asking me, Brett? Okay. Yeah. So currently that language is in code, and that's how it is in the rule.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further discussion, we can split this item a little bit. If there's some motions that deviate from the division's recommendation, be happy to take them individually, and then we can approve the remainder as a block. Is there any desire to make motions? I'd entertain a motion now for anything other than the division's recommendation.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a question of the rest of the RAC by chance? Would anybody be willing to speak? Any of the constituents be willing to speak to some of this? Potentially avoid redundant or unnecessary motions that fail a second or don't get support? Or do we just move forward and make the motions and go through every?
I can. Is there any desire to make any motions on the collar on the 6 units or on a statewide basis?
I would like to make a motion to do it statewide. No collared lions by houndsmen.
Okay. We have a motion from Dick to prohibit take of collared lions with hounds statewide. Do we have a second?
Yes, this is Daniel. I'll second that.
And we have a second. All right, we will do a roll call. Daniel?
Yes.
Conroy?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Dusty? Motion passes unanimous. Thank you. Are there any other? I think we'll just have to go with motions, Daniel, just to answer your question.
Okay.
It's hard to communicate, with the remote and present at the same time. So if you have a desire to make a motion, go ahead.
Most definitely. I would like to make a motion to return those 9 harvest objective units to the limited entry split sieve and harvest structure. To ensure focus on the predator management units.
Do you follow that, Darren?
Yeah, I'm just double checking. I'm pretty sure there are 10 units that don't currently have limited entry seasons on.
So these are the units that are not in predator management, correct, Daniel?
That is correct, yes, Mr. Chair.
That's right. There are 10 units that don't currently have a limited entry season. And that's what we're talking
That are harvest objective that are not in
about. They're not
predator
in
management.
predator management, correct.
And in the region, what units does that affect here?
It'd just be the south slope. Oh, sorry, Dax, go ahead.
I'm Dax Mangus. I'm the regional wildlife program manager, and I might speak to the unit in our region, just specifically just to give a little bit of additional information. So the South Slope Bonanza Vernal Diamond, that unit actually does qualify to be in predator management because of our deer population, but we did not recommend putting it in predator management because we already had the harvest objective strategy for lion hunting on that unit, and we had not been hitting the quota. So, to make that formal recommendation to put it into predator management wouldn't have changed anything with regard to how we were already hunting lions on the unit. So it does meet the criteria to be in predator management, but we didn't formally put it into predator management for deer just because we already had the harvest strategies that we would have moved to had we put it into under predator management. So, from our perspective, because we did that, I guess now if we went back and retroactively changed the cougar harvest strategy, that would be a little bit concerning to us, and we would regret not having made the recommendation to formally put it into predator management. But when we didn't make that recommendation, it's because it wasn't going to change anything. So just for clarification.
Yeah.
The only thing I'd add to that is that if probably what would happen if this did change the harvest to include a limited entry season is we'd recommend a predator management plan for that unit.
For that specific unit.
So
The
for that
book
specific
cliffs are already in predator management.
Right.
And South Slope Yellowstone's already predator management. Is already is in the other group in the predator management.
Right.
Okay.
I don't want to short circuit the discussion, but just so everyone's aware of kind of where we be coming from a management standpoint. And this is what I was talking about. Really like to have the flexibility so that we could do something like this and choose a different strategy, maybe if we needed to.
Yes, and I hear what Matt and Daniel's saying. Wanting an area to have a quality hunt, and so I hear both sides.
Well, and Mr. Chair, it's not just quality. It's directing predator harvest focused to predator management units specifically. And if I could ask a clarifying question from Dax, did the Vernal South Slope receive a change in the deer population objective? Or what are those numbers? How do they look in relation to predator management?
They're looking that up right now to see what the objective status is.
This might be current. You'd have to take a look, but these should be current objectives, or at least from what.
And you know what? I'm sorry, go ahead.
We did recently lower the objective on those units. So, and it still qualifies even with the lowered objective that went through I think it was last fall when we redid unit deer management plans. We lowered the objective a little bit on that unit. I'd have to look the exact numbers up, but we did lower it based on, more recent performance and assessment of the unit, and it still qualified. So.
Okay, that was really the reasoning for my question.
Okay. So did we have a motion on the table? We do. We had Daniel, repeat your motion, please.
It was to establish the remaining units in a harvest objective strategy to a split harvest limited entry strategy, management strategy.
Okay. Do we have a second on that motion? Okay, hearing none, that motion fails for lack of a second. Are there any other motions that are deviations from the recommendation by the division?
Yeah, I would like to address item 4 that the UHA presented in regards to, excuse me, that'd be number 3, the Beaver East as predator management. Concerns there, not specifically to that unit. However, we got poor body conditions, so we can only forecast and take a guess. I would hate and not feel well knowing that we're kind of jumping the gun. We don't know what kind of winter we're going to encounter. We don't know, the survivability of the adults, and a predator management plan is for 3 years. I feel it's a preemptive approach. We do have the ability to address that if the winter is deemed to be significant and lead to a higher mortality. Under HB 125, it gives the director those opportunities and the division the full discretion to be able to enact that when it's needed. And I personally have a hard time seeing enacting that as a forecast and kind of a speculation. So I make a motion to not add Beaver East to predator management designation.
We have a motion to exclude Beaver East from predator management. Is it proposed to be in predator management, or is it currently in predator management
It's
right now, Darren?
currently, so predator management plans are director action. So that's not an action item on the agenda, but the Southeastern region made a recommendation to the board along those lines, so that's how they handled it. But predator management plans are included as a informational, just so people know
And
which
that
ones
one's
are going
current.
in.
It's not proposed to go,
It
it's
was
currently.
done recently, but yeah,
It's
currently.
already enacted. Okay. So that's still a valid motion that we could make the recommendation to the director to remove Beaver East from predator management. Is that accurate, Daniel? Does that summarize your motion?
Now, under predator management, maybe some clarification to my motion so I can be clear on this and understand myself. Just because it's in predator management, Darren, does that automatically institute a unlimited harvest strategy, or can different management strategies be applied even though it's predator management?
It does, but typically we'd want to keep units under predator management for 3 years. But having said, because we need time to see an effect. Having said that, we review every predator management plan twice annually, both in July, after we've seen what kind of winter we've had and seen real data on what our populations have done from the winter. It also gives us a chance to look at drought and see what's going on, right in the summer. The other time we review it would be in December, just after we get body condition scores. So we're looking at how those animals look before they go in the winter, and again in July. So a plan could be enacted anytime, generally those 2 times of year, if district biologists and managers feel like it's necessary. But they could also come out under the same review process. And conceivably, it wouldn't necessarily have to go 3 years. Most of the time, we're going to be looking at that time frame. But conceivably, if facts on the ground change, new research, whatever, they could be brought out to before the end of that period. So, Daniel, hopefully that kind of clarifies the process. That's kind of what we're doing.
It does, and understanding that being under a predator management plan gives it a higher level of focus and attention, if you will, rather than one that's not. I guess the main part of my question is it a requirement that the hunt strategy or harvest strategy for the predator management goes unlimited, or is there opportunity for the division I wasn't clear on the rule on that. And if by default there's no discretion, it automatically falls in unlimited harvest.
It's unlimited according to policy, and I'm trying to remember what the legislation says. I don't think the legislation specifically says that, but in policy, that's how we would address it. So if we had a unit where we're interested in a high quota, not necessarily unlimited, then that would remain in harvest objective, even if it potentially qualified for predator management. I don't know that would necessarily happen, but yeah, if it goes for predator management, it's unlimited.
By
Yes, by policy.
Okay. So in other words, we have the wildlife board has the discretion for harvest strategy, irregardless to RAC recommendations or what have you. It's not in-house rule. And that's really what this addresses. And I want to speak to that a little bit because on a lot of these initial harvests, when these units go from either a limited harvest strategy and get opened, there's an abundance of harvest that takes place in those older predators. And I think we're going to see some of that from the studies that are done, where it tends to spike the population of those animals. And that's where I'm very cautious as well, that I'd lean to not want to trigger something like that and get us down that path. I would rather err on the side of caution for a year and see where we end up next year, with the discretion that, the director has all authority to increase quotas and things of that nature. So, Mr. Chair, if I may, I would like to restate my motion or strike my motion and make a new one.
Yes, go ahead.
My new motion would be that the Beaver East be managed in a harvest objective strategy rather than unlimited, with an increase of 5 lions more than the previous year harvest strategy.
Repeat that. I'm trying to get it in my notes. Go ahead.
That the Beaver East hunt strategy be harvest objective with a 5 lion increase from the previous year harvest strategy.
Instead of unlimited. That's what we're
Correct.
talking about. Right?
Yes, sir.
I guess that conflicts with, that would have to be removed from predator management to achieve that, right, Darren?
No, it doesn't.
Predator management.
If we change it to harvest objective, then yeah, it would have to be removed from a predator management plan. But I'd suggest the RAC go ahead and vote on it. And
Yeah, just that it's clear what you're asking, Daniel. So, so we have a motion to change the Beaver East to harvest objective with 5 lion increase on the quota. Do we have a second?
Before I comment, can I ask if the RAC that's over the beaver, did they discuss this?
Yeah, it did. It came up as under the same proposal that the Houndsman Association's made tonight. They voted to leave it. Well, they didn't vote to move it forward to the board at all. So
they voted to.
They discussed it
and then went with the recommendation of the division.
I pointed out that it wasn't really an action item, but they were welcome. Certainly within their purview to discuss it and make recommendations to the board, and they chose not to do anything further.
Did you get that, Dick?
The Southeast region did.
Just to clarify, so Southern region is where this unit's located. We did have district biologists available at that meeting to explain why it was why it was in predator management. I think that probably helped in that discussion. But yes, the Southeastern region last night did vote to recommend to the board and the director to remove it from predator management.
Thank you. So Dick, to answer your question, the region that it's in did not make the motion, but the Southeast region did make a similar motion to Daniel's.
All right, thank you. That's what I was wondering.
So we have a motion on the table. We're looking for a second on the Beaver East. Do we have one? Hearing none, we will move on to, are there any other deviations, or are we ready to approve the remainder as presented? Speak now if there's any deviations. Oh, yes. Yes, Conroy put a note on there. All right, I will entertain a motion for the remainder of the action item, Cougar recommendations.
Yeah, this is Dan Abeta, and I make a motion that we accept the remainder of the division's proposal for Cougar recommendations as it's been presented here.
Do we have a second?
This is Dick. I'll second it.
Thank you. Roll call. Daniel?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Dusty? Is that a yes? Thank you. That's unanimous. And that wraps up our action items. We will now move to Strawberry River WMA Habitat Management Plan. Tori Mathis is here to, it was online and I hope everybody looked at it. Tori, would you please just be available for questions? And if there's anything you want to summarize, I thought reading the document, I thought it was very well done. I know you've done a lot of work up there.
Thank you.
So go ahead.
Tori Mathis, Habitat Restoration Biologist with the DWR. This is a fairly routine update of a management plan for our Strawberry River WMA, except what may not be entirely routine is we want to change the boundaries. We want to lump the Strawberry River WMA and the Timber Canyon WMA into one property. Included with that would be all of the lands that are going to be transferred to the DWR from the Bureau of Reclamation and the Mitigation Commission. And so it makes one large continuous block that we want to manage as one WMA instead of separate parcels. When all is said and done, the goals are simply to promote and protect and enhance fish and wildlife habitat and opportunities for people to use that habitat for recreation. Fishing would be one of the primary uses, but hunting also. So any questions I will gladly answer.
I noticed there's some fragmented pieces like the Petrus property and a few that probably, are they providing a value or you just kind of ended up with them or?
We kind of ended up with them through a number of different transfers and purchases, and they kind of fit best with that Strawberry River property to manage all as one piece. It's not necessarily unusual for our WMAs to have fragmented parcels scattered around, so that happens fairly regularly.
Those fragmented pieces are surrounded by tribal lands too that may not show up on maps. You kind of block up some big pieces of that.
Yeah, Tori, I've got a question. As the work continues, I mean, and it's a big project, obviously. I mean, but has there been any discussion on trying to return that fishery, the Strawberry River, to a native Colorado River cutthroat trout fishery and to try to, just go to that type of a fishery and not have it be before it was primarily a brown trout fishery?
I don't know if there have been a lot of discussions about returning it to native only. I think there are probably going to remain some of those non-native fish, the brown trout, that survived some of the flood events up higher, below the Soldier Creek Dam. Some of those fish stayed in the river, and I don't believe there are any plans on removing them, but the division has restocked Colorado River cutthroat trout, and that is a priority to maintain in that system.
Okay, are there any other questions for Tori? If not, this is not a voting item, it's informational, and we appreciate all your good work up there. You've had your hands full with the sediment.
And there's more to do. Thank you.
So, thank you. That concludes our public RAC agenda. We have an internal task with the RAC members. So I guess, Mike, those that are public or DWR, you need not stay on the thing, but we need to discuss some RAC leadership issues. And so the RAC members, please stay on. And the rest of you, thank you for attending. I guess I can take a motion to adjourn at this point. And this will conclude our RAC meeting. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we adjourn our meeting.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. And then Daniel and Dick, you're the two that are still online that need to hang around for a minute. The motion to adjourn, Daniel?
Yes.
Conroy's already gone. Dick?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Dusty? Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Miles to address the topic. We need to discuss leadership on the RAC.
Well, that's they weren't easy, but we found some meetings. So we're still struggling.
So the issue at hand is, according to the code, RAC chairs and vice chairs need to be elected or decided on every 2 years. Both Brett Prevdale and Dan Abeta have been in their roles as chair and vice chair for 2 years. Now, according to that, they are eligible to be renewed for an additional 2-year term. And so that's why we need to discuss that now. So the RAC, this needs to be part of the public process, as we just learned. So I guess I would throw it out. There's a couple options. The meeting's still streaming. We can talk about it, but we are also missing a substantial number of RAC members tonight. I think it would be fine to postpone deciding on the chair and vice chair until the next meeting. But I want to throw that out for the RAC and what you think, what your thoughts are before we move forward. with that.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Miles. I think that would be wise to postpone having elections for new leadership, chair and vice chair until our next RAC meeting, given the number of RAC members that are missing.
I agree, and perhaps on the pre-meeting details, having that as an action item for just our region, not that it has to be part of the agenda, but it is a public process, so I don't know if it needs to be on the agenda, but at least that way the remainder of our board knows the significance to be present for it, I guess, and understands.
Sounds good to me.
Sure, that's fine with me. Yeah, we'll make sure it's stressed for the next meeting, and then we can take action on it then.
Thank you for your participation, Daniel and Dick. We appreciate you logging in and appreciate your comments and the good discussion. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You guys too.
Thank you, fellas. You guys have a good night out, and our new member of the RAC board.
Yep, thank you.